I might kick it off. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our July Global Encounters and First Nations Peoples seminar. It's a real pleasure to have Dr. Nonja Peters speaking to us tonight. Some of you will be aware that Nonja was going to present earlier this year, but sadly we decided to cancel because that was around the time of our team experienced a bereavement. So we thought we would reschedule for now. I'm coming to you from the unceded lands of Naarm, now known as Melbourne. I'm Lynette Russell. I am the director of the Global Encounters and First Nations Peoples program. And I'm really looking forward to hearing this tonight. Nonja is going to be talking to us about the Christian slaves of Depok. And Nonja has an amazing background, like talk about a polymath, worked in all sorts of interesting environments. We just heard you started learning typing on Olivetti. That's even another one I'll add to the list. But Nonja has worked in heritage organisations, in universities, in museums. She has a list of fantastic exhibitions and obviously fabulous publications. So it's a real pleasure that tonight we get to welcome her to speak to us about the Christian slaves of Depok, a colonial tale unravels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Russell, and I'm very privileged indeed to be invited and very much appreciate it. And I will get into it. So do I get 45 minutes now?
Yes, yep.
Good, because I've got my timer on. Otherwise, I won't. So how did I get to do this research? Well, I started a few years back doing research on what we call the Verlander project, which was between Dutch academics and myself and a photographer, looking at the incursion of the Dutch East India Company into the Indian Ocean region and its impact on indigenous groups in South Africa and Namibia, the little island of Kisa off the coast of Timor-Leste, which is Indonesian owned, and then the Malgana and the Nanda Aboriginal people on the shipwreck coast of West Australia who claim Dutch heritage through the shipwrecks of the Zoutdorp, mainly the Zoutdorp it is. So that when we were doing this, one Dutchman said to me, well, why haven't you included the Depokkers in this? I said, well, we haven't got the money for a start. and so but I said, we will look at it next year. So we did a pilot in Depok because they'd been telling us about this fabulous chap who, he was one of the councillor of the Dutch East India Company, but he'd bought a lot of slaves. And when he died, he freed them and gave them a property. And this was quite amazing. So the museum in the Netherlands, who had agreed to also do our other exhibitions, said they were very interested, and we wrote a proposal around what we knew from what we'd heard, and of course got funded because this was looking pretty good. So I didn't have much to go on at that point, and I started to look at how I was going to do this, and I started off scientifically, as we all do with a proposal. But my intention always was to turn the data into exhibitions and books that would bridge the gap between the public and, of course, mainly the public and academia. So I gathered my data with the methods of the grounded theory, which I always found very interesting. It's inductive, it's iterative and comparative, and it's based on a steady movement between concept and data across the various types of evidence to control the conceptual level and the scope of emerging understanding. And then it's utilized after that to develop a history. And I used an eclectic array of data, loads of archives, national archives, city archives, war archives, genealogical archives, regional archives, and the archives in Jakarta, but again, I was using VOC documentation, marginalia, realia, and other files to do with Depok and Chastelein at that point. I also used a lot of documentation that had been published by missionaries, and of course their yearly reports. And I used that to quantify and contextualize 40 oral histories that we did, 20 in the Netherlands with Depokkers, and 20 in Jakarta in Depok itself. I wanted to find out more about Chastelein's character and his motives and the emotional impact on the Depokkers of enslavement, religion, missionaries, the Japanese occupation, Indonesian revolution for independence and the diaspora, and about how this impacted their sense of place identity and belonging. Then, of course, the motivation, so to take action, led me to the philosophy of Kenneth Burke, whose pentad to me seemed an excellent fit for this research. And he argues that motivation cannot be easily explained because in any dramatic and rhetorical situation, motivation is a matter of the relationship between who, where, what, when, why, and how. And so just like a detective novel, really, which suited me well. I always also, after the analysis, referred to the motivational talk of C. Wright Mills, because frequently he says that protagonists make different motivational claims about their behavior to peers, family, courtrooms, a criminologist, or even themselves and significant others. This fitted what was happening for the oral histories in that the amount of information that we got about the Bersiap period, during the Indonesian Revolution, was much more extensive from Depokkers living in the Netherlands than the ones we interviewed in Depok. So can we have the first slide, please? No, the next one, please. So then to move on to well, okay, who is Cornelis Chastelein? And there you have Amsterdam at the top. That's the time he was born in 1657. Both his grandparents were entrepreneurs. He comes from an entrepreneurial family, and at the bottom there is Nantes, where his paternal grandfather lived and had distilleries. He was making cheap wines into brandy and then exporting it, and that actually shows his actual distilleries. The first 4 on the river are his. That's a map of Amsterdam at the time of Chastelein, with lots of canals, and that's his signature below. At the time when he was about 7, his father died, and all the siblings, there's 7 altogether, were orphaned. His mother had died three years earlier. His guardians moved them from the very rich Fluwelen Berkwal, and I can't translate into English, and to, which is now, by the way, the Ouderzijds Voorburgwal, which I also am no better at translating to English. And he was baptized, by the way, in the Zoderkerk, into the Reformed Church, and the family's fervent Calvinist Christians. He was probably educated, I would think, at a Francis school instead of a Latin school, a French school, because that's where you learnt the sort of skill sets to be an entrepreneur. Anyway, the guardians shifted them to another part of the Lelystad, which is another canal, but again, it's less expensive, but there's 7 of them, and the legacy has got to see them through, and 5 of them are underage at that time. Eventually, 5 of the 7 make their lives in the Indies because that's a chance to still improve their status. The next slide, please. So he arrives in Batavia when he's 18 to take up a job as a scribe and bookkeeper for the VOC at Fort Batavia. And there you see the built environment on the right. I use a lot of also travel writers and artists usually came together at that time. And on the left is the harbour. The ships are out there, and the people were brought in off the ships on little lighters. On the right, above you have, with the palm trees, you have a market, and the back the fort, the coat of arms of Batavia, and then of course the city. And next slide, please. This is a time of slavery, of course, and he's confronted immediately with slaves everywhere there are slaves. And this is the census of 1679, and so he's been there, well, he arrived 65, so it's approximately at that time. There's very few Dutch, Chinese, you can read it there. Mardekers are a mixture from the Portuguese and mixed race, Eurasians, Javanese, Malay, and Balinese, very few, but there are 16,695,000 slaves. And by 1790, that has increased to 40,000 slaves. Would you like to? And by the way, you can see at the bottom there, The light brown is mixed slaves. The one above it is the chained slaves. And the two slight bits of purple are actually the very rich people living. The rest are slaves or Chinese or others. Move on, please. Thank you. Okay, so slavery is very much a part of this story. Slavery and concubinage as an institution of God has its roots in the Old Testament. And I'll leave you to read that while I read you something else. So historian Henk Niemeyer portrays the church as a living, enterprising entity whose preachers in Asia quickly found ways to combine its Dutch Calvinistic background with the realities of the situation and its relations, wealth accumulation and slavery. Slave markets were well established in pre-colonial times in Banten, Aceh, Malacca, Bali, Burma, Marganai, Makassar, and Banda. Most households in Batavia had slaves. The number was usually dictated by their rank. Pastors had slaves. I found letters where they're saying, we need more salary. I've got 10 slaves. Slaves were a status symbol. The VOC, as I've said, was never the largest slave owner. People of all ethnic origins exploited slavery. Next, please. So 16 years after Chastelein has worked for the VOC, he decides to spend the next 13 years, well, he does spend the next 30 years, develop properties in the hinterlands. And he buys a property within the 20, well, the bottom map shows you two properties, Weltevree and Noordwijk. These are the first he buys, and they're within the 20-kilometer zone, which is safe. He then buys two more. First of all, Serensing, which is the one at the bottom there. And then the top 5 land pieces there are actually Depok. That's right. Thank you very much. Below, you'll see the man with the parasol. That's the artist. He's holding a parasol. It's the only image we have actually of Chastelein. And that's the Serensing property. So if you go to the next slide, oh, in the top, you get some of the houses in the very salubrious part of town there, where, of course, Chastelein also owns money. He actually is, according to Dehaan, one of the archivists there at the time, Chastelein, well, not there at the time, but certainly archivist in the 1800s, he was saying that Chastelein sent a ship out to Bali to acquire slaves from the slave markets to service his estates. And he talks later on, and in fact, the artist in that picture talks about the fact that he has been met by 18 Balinese warriors who Chastelein claims actually will fight to the death for his safety. Next, please. So trying to find out a bit more about Chastelein, who are his friends, maybe we could find some more. They own these properties. They're all very interested in agriculture and in trying new crops. On their properties, they grow sugar for income and also rice. And the sugar mills are a problem because they're already creating deforestation at that point. They all try new Chinese tea, coffee, pepper, and the pepper plant is actually drawn on Depok by the same artist. The one below is drawn by him on, and that is indigo, coffee, bush leaves on Weltevree. They're all keen on classifying plants and support anyone that's doing that sort of work. They're interested in cash crops. Their architecture of their homes sometimes has features from where they've spent a lot of time for the VOC. So the top one is Kamphouses, Governor General. It has a Japanese influence. He was on Decima a lot. And the one below that is from the Van Horns, and they were on China and so forth. So if you, the next one, please. They were all fervent Christians and they all owned slaves, of course. Trying to find out a bit more about Chastelein's character, I came across a poem that was dedicated to him by the Governor General Campos. So it is about thinking, not doing. It is really about the work ethic. And I can read you what I've translated. I'm translating from very old Dutch documentation, and the spelling's not standardized, but I didn't go to a Dutch school either, so my spelling's lousy as well, so perhaps that helped me. So it's called Thinking, thinking without doing. Are we there?
Yep.
Okay. Who always thinks and ponders and never dares get started, who always contemplates the magnitude of the work, who always lies reflecting, perturbed about the meaning, never builds a house, much less a church. Clasp hands on the plough. And this sentence comes into his testament, his 2 ego documents, his testament, and an encroaching thoughts document is invalide gedachte. It's a similar sentence is found in Luke 6.62, no one having put his hands to the plough and looking back is fit for the kingdom of the Lord. Look, the PowerPoint's disappeared.
Oh, we can still see it?
I can't.
Ah. Right, I don't know what's happened there. Must be your end.
You can't see the PowerPoint?
I can't see the PowerPoint.
Okay. I might just quickly stop sharing and then start again.
Yep, that might be a good idea. We'll try that.
Okay, so sorry.
That's right.
Can you see that now, Nonja?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's go again.
That's great. Okay, so that's the poem. And of course, Nicholas Whitson, the Lord Mayor of Amsterdam, he works very much, although he's an armchair historian, he works with getting plants sent to them. And his family's history and his motto is also the Labour conquers all. Please, next one. Yeah, so I'm saying that there's a strong work ethic, and the first stanza of that poem is hanging on his Serensing property. What's different about Depok and the other estates he has is that it has kampongs on it. It has 9 kampongs on it, and it runs a bit like a feudal system at that particular time, in that the Muslim farmers pay a day's corvée and for 5% of their yield, which is in lieu of the rental, if you like. Chastelein asks them many times how long they've been on that land, and they claim that they came on that land when the Bantonese fled, but I don't have real dates for that sort of thing. And they're recognized as an ethnic group called, well, ethnic Batavi, but they come from all over Java. There you see that the harvest being distributed below and the tithes. And this is still happening right until Depok is Depok. Would you please, thanks, next. Depok, Chastelein is invited to sit on to the Council of the Indies in 1704. He does so after he's finishing his 104-page treatise Invalide gedachte, which really translates us a bit like encroaching thoughts. As a councillor, he's also president of the Orphan Chambers and commissioner of the Batavian Church, Council of Churches. This is important to the rest of the story because on the latter role, that would have alerted him to the fact that there are loads of freed slaves looking for alms who can't make it. There's then a law invoked which says that for 6 years, if your slaves can't make it, you are responsible for them. Next. I wanted to read you this. I don't know if I can read it all because part of it is behind the screen. I don't know how to shift that a bit. Anyway, I'm going to try. So this is one stanza out, well, one paragraph out of his encroaching thoughts, because I think it's very important. Like most Christians at the time, Chastelein's religious duties included evangelising, which he took up with vim and vigour, beginning with the Christianising of his slaves. However, there's some disturbing parts to that. He states with confidence the religion, along with the good conscience and purpose, has a political function. Every wise person knows how necessary and useful it is to and he articulates, he can use it to bring about and feed animosity amongst and distrust amongst the Christianized slaves. He claims that with his earlier, before they were Christianized, that they were on a dog leash of the Muslims on the land. It was no longer the case after he's Christianized them, and after Christianization, the Muslims no longer dared to confront his slaves directly. This way, religion attached his slaves even more strongly to him. Next, please. Chastelein dies unexpectedly after a long fever in Fort Batavia. He was only 57. And so if you'll turn, next, please. Next. So what happens then? No, back. This is then his testament, his other ego document. He leaves his son Anthony because his daughter seems to have died. There's no mention of her anymore. This is written from fragments all the time, of course. Anthony inherits 3 estates, plus the slaves to run them, and all expensive material possessions in his home. His mixed-race daughters, Maria and Katerina, from his concubines, they get a tract of land each and quite a bit of money. His son is also the guardian of the younger one, Katerina. Maria, the older girl who's already married, whom he legally adopted, is allowed to take the non-luxurious items from his homes and any double books in the library. He legates her mother some land, cash, a house, and a mango grove and a buffalo herd. The troublemakers are excluded, but the slaves, the Christianized slaves, which he frees, inherit 1,244 hectares, all the tools of trade, stock, horses, buffalo to run it. There's accommodation on it. There's enough rice to last them until the yield comes good. He organizes managers and he names them. They are to distribute the goods, organize the tithe with the Muslims and the corvée. He tells his freed slaves that they can choose a piece of land each and to develop it. And then it becomes inheritable within the group. It's a bit like an Orwellian, what's the book? Animal Farm, in a sense. And in fact, that sort of seems to happen out of it. But they must marry within the group and not to outside, to keep outsiders away. And they must have a tutor to keep up the religious tutoring. He bequeaths young slaves to freed slaves, and on his death, on the death of the old slave, they can be let free. So he hasn't freed everybody. Next. And those are possibly his concubines, by the way, on the left, but we can't be sure. They were drawn on Depok and Serency. So why? What does he do? Is that he's declared, I declare unreservedly that it is my intention and desire, confident that it can seed over time, to have Depok develop into a beautiful, robust, self-sufficient Christian community, and with their freedom, earn an honest living, sans the need to resort to church or government arms. And then we go back to that slide where I was telling you about the government arms. So can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the people we interviewed said, well, is he good or is he bad? Hank Niemeyer, the archivist, his legacy is not unique, he said. In fact, when I first approached him to say, I'm doing Chastelein, and do you know where I could go for archival sources? Because he has done a lot of, through the Courts Foundation, a lot of archival digitization. And he said, I hope you're not going to make him into a saint. And I thought, oh, that's a different story coming up. Menno Leinster, who does a lot of translating of VOC documentation for me, he said, well, really, it's just his Chastelein's transition to Christian salvation. The archivist, who I told you about, he said, well, look, I think it's a social experiment. On the other hand, on the positive side, Charlie Robinson, intellectual and writer, called Chastelein a humanist, stating that his spirit lives on in the Depokkers. The missionaries who come into Depok honored him as an ardent and sincere promoter of the kingdom of God and advancement of, because he advanced Christianity among the Gentiles and Mohammedans, and both for personal and for religious obligations. My point would be, well, there was now a law to say that you had to look after them for 6 years. They couldn't go for arms everywhere. 150 to 200 slaves at least, that's a lot of and Depok, he said, was cheap to buy. So leaving them then was one way of getting rid of that that information. And Niemeyer says that Chastelein has been often brought up an example out of context simply because the gift was so large. And so a lot of people think they know more about him than anyone else. Next, please. So what do we know about the Depokkers? Well, we know they were the descendants, they're the descendants of Cornelis Chastelein, slaves from Bali, Makassar, the Coromandel Coast, and Bengal. And some also, and of course there's mixed race, because as Europeans move into the area into the mid-1800s, they're now mixture, but they're not everyone. Next, please. The missionary century is an important century for the change that happens to the Depokkers. And you see them all there. The missionaries, actually, they start with the London Missionary Organization Society, simply because during the French, there's not much there, but during the British time on Java, the London Missionary Society set up a missionary school in Depok and trained some teachers. Later on, when it becomes the Dutch colony again, of course, it's taken over by the Netherlands missionary organization. And you can see the church coming up there at the bottom. And there are a number of missionaries who are extremely scathing about the Depokkers. Next, please. So when they arrive in Depok, the Netherlands Missionary Society, they encounter Christianity in a holding pattern. The Depokkers are living subsistence lifestyles. And I must say that 1 month after Chastelein's death, part of the reason is that the Council of the Indies, while they let them live there, removed all their rights as owners and managers of Depok. But they did give them usufruct into perpetuity, which means it's useless for anyone else, that land, because it is into perpetuity. But in 1850, one of the descendants of Chastelein say, well, look, it's really ours, because the council had given it the property then to the son, to Anthony, both the land and management. So they're saying, well, it's really ours. It goes to the high courts eventually, who finally give them in 1850 allodial ownership of the Depok estate. So they don't have it until then. And I find that quite astounding for the simple reason, and I had fixed up the astounding, not it's not abolished, because slavery is not abolished in Southeast Asia until 1863. So this was quite a ruling. Next. Then, as I say, the missionaries are scathing, and they say it's Christianity by contract, it's not real Christianity. And look, there's been a lack of population growth compared to the Israelites, and the Depokkers have simply not developed the land. No one, apart from one missionary, talks about the centuries of epidemics at that time: measles, cholera, typhoid, smallpox, dysentery, crop failures, stem diseases, pestilence, plague, earthquakes. And there was an earthquake even in 1834. Just one missionary does mention that in 1834. He notes that in his annual report that an epidemic had killed a teacher's wife, all his children and mother-in-law, and that he was now living in sin. And he puts the blame on people who had lost their ways. He doesn't, in that period of time, 6 of Pastor Bokoff's children die, 2 wives of the Reverend Concrete, and 2 missionary dies, and that's not seen to be a people gone the wrong way. If you just, next slide, please. This is just a short quote from the Inspector of Evangelical Missionary Posts. He says, "My eyes and ears are open." This is when he sees his first native, as he says. "My impression of these poor people was sad and unfavorable. They were small, skinny and ugly with pitch black teeth, not at all attractive for an aesthetic person. I wanted to hear God say, 'Are these the brothers of my flesh?' I asked, 'Then why am I so far above them?'" And this is sort of how they come in. It all changes. Next slide. With Bokoff. Bokoff comes in, Jan Bokoff, in 1864 to 1899, and this is important. He's a farmer's son from Doetinchem in Gelderland in the Netherlands, with an immense energy, entrepreneurial flair, and the appropriate skill sets. And he leads the Depokkers to improve their lives religiously, economically, educationally, and socioculturally. In contrast to earlier missionaries, his support is practical, although he does found choirs, women's groups, and funding for a seminary. But he masterminded the construction of an irrigation system to increase Depokkers' rice yield. He helped establish a weekly market to keep sellers and buyers in Depok. In 5 years, he saw the Depokker rice fields increase from 1,000 bao, that's 709.7 hectares, to in 1897, their 1,234 hectares are actually in rice. By then, Depok also has a train service. He oversees the building of a community hall and organises for an auxiliary post office. It's beginning to become a village. In 1873, he organises with the government to have a Dutch school built in Depok. And so, and Dutch language, all the Depok children, the slaves, the descendants of the slaves, go to the Dutch school. They can then pass public exams and they become clerical jobs or administrative jobs for government or private industry in either Batavia or Botenzorg, which is now Bogor. The missionary school then takes in the Muslim children, but it's in the language of teaching there is Malay. He also organized for the construction of a road 5 miles to meet up the big road between East and West Java. And he directed the upgrade of the Depokkers brick and tile family. Next slide. So now they're well-heeled. They've moved from subsistence farmers to well-heeled Dutch-speaking citizens. They've also achieved assimilation, some of them. So you could put in for an assimilation if you could prove you were living a Dutch lifestyle. That was gelijkgesteld, and you were then often called gazetted Dutch because it would appear in the Gazette. And there's some of the families around 1900 to 1920. Next, please. By the beginning of the next century, of course, it's a good life, and you can see Harley Davidson, wonderful cars, villas, the church has been upgraded, and big families holding that, but there's still tithe being organized with as a rental from the Muslim in the kampongs. Yes, please. Next slide. Okay, so how do we look at that? I've looked at that from the perspective of Abraham Maslow, hierarchy of needs. Having fulfilled all their very basic needs and more, they were in a position to sell their service, they're making money. In effect, these significant changes brought with them a different set of wants and needs. And I've told you that they wanted to become gelijkgesteld, so they want to be treated as equal to Dutch, although that completely equal is never happens to any of the mixed race people. So what became interesting now is an origins narrative. At the same time, the newest pastor comes in, De Graaf, and he creates Chastelein Duck, because in fact, the Bokov pastor, the one who brings up all their rice fields, he has really helped to realize Chastelein's dream of this thriving agricultural community. This chap, he starts Chastelein Day, and every day, once a year on Chastelein's birthday, they start honoring him and having a great celebration. On the first Chastelein Day, he hands a plaque, his gift to the church, which is a marble plaque, which has it on, "The righteous shall be remembered forever," and a psalm to support that. And forever after that, the Depokkers go in every week to church. We'll see Chastelein on it. But Chastelein hasn't realized his dream, really. It really was it was Bokov. However, without the land, of course, neither would have happened. Thank you. So the origins myth, and how am I going? It becomes something that no one knows where they came from. So it evolved from 12 families. By the time this origin myth is being constructed, if you like, there's only 12 families. And you can see the church gets the doors, all the doors, they put it in quite late. All those doors have the name of one of the families. Just Jano Jonathan's on the left, Jonathan's Pickles, Chastelein, the father of slaves. Henny Isaac, he repeats the whole story of the 12 families where Chastelein went out and he chose 12 people. Others say 12 families. That makes it a little bit more realistic. And that he gave them names, and that he especially chose them to inherit Depok. Of course, none of that is substantiable. For a start, there's a residence for 44 people, 44 families. When Chastelein dies, there are 44 families already being catered for on Depok. Another 22 residences are going up. The only name that appears on the testament actually is Sudira, and in the middle you have Pastor Jessie Sudira. That name's come right through. She says, well, I'm a cleric because I want to honor and preserve Chastelein's legacy. So the input of the missionary has been enormous. And well, a myth, it's functional. It keeps them together all around the world, but it's missing out on ever giving any honor to Bokov, who actually helped them to get to that. Next, please. And the next one after that's Tempodulo. Well, the good life ends with the Japanese occupation, and they expect loyalty, but they are allowed to keep the land at that point. Whereas all the white Dutch, if you like, in Depok are put into internment camps. This is very sad for their women and children because they no longer have an income and have a very hard time of it too, and no education. And the children are sent to the markets to try and make an income. They cook biscuits and whatever. But the environment is becoming increasingly threatening for the Indos, the mixed race people, whose loyalty is demanded by Japan. And they all have to have identity documents, and you can see there where Japan has actually the incursion of Japan into Southeast Asia at that time. And more security checks are focused on them. Next, please. That comes to an end. There is some resistance in Depok. I will just say that before I get to that. And the Japanese put quite a few Depokkers in prison who were in part of a resistance movement at that time. By the end of 1944, the Japanese administration of the region had led to a failure of food supply, which in turn caused widespread famine, malnutrition and illness. Medicines, clothing and footwear were unobtainable, and many people were clad only in gunny sacks, burlap or thin sheets of rubber. As many as 2.4 million Javanese died of starvation in these years. Lots of bodies on the streets. Some say 4 million died. Mini Ramusha, which Chastelein organized for slave labor, also for the Japanese. And there was a huge death toll there as well. When Japan capitulates, of course, there is no governance, and under the terms of surrender, they must now look after the people in the camps who are interned and keep law and order. Next. 2 days later, Sukarno declares Indonesian independence, and a 6-week power gap ensues because Southeast Asia Command is unable to come at that point to undertake interim governance. Sukarno's team want independence via democracy. The nationalists Bermuda want independence via aggression. Next. On the 1st of September, so this is still during the period of lack of governance. And if you look at what's happening out on the buildings, Sukarno also says, as from today, I urge you to fly the red and white flag around the whole of Indonesia. And the national greeting for the people should be Merdeka, or freedom. So this is and also the warning there, we ask you for the last time to watch your attitude. I wish I could just move my screen across because let's see, I can, thank you. Because I couldn't read it there. We ask you for the last time to correct your attitude towards the will of the Indonesian people for independence. You are being observed constantly. So if you try to disturb peace and order demanded by the English occupation forces, we will destroy all of you, and we mean business, so be warned. So these are the anti-Dutch slogans. And it isn't until much later that actually SEAC arrives. Next. On the 8th of December, there are teams parachuted in from the recovery of Allied prisoners of war and internees by the UK to see where it's all at with all the internment camps, where they've been told it's getting dangerous. 15th of September, the HMS Cumberland warship, it berths offshore. It holds meeting with the Japanese and also with other personnel on the land at the time to try and work out how they're going to repatriate and how they need to look after the interned. The Indonesian view this as a collaboration with Japan. They had not been invited to attend, which was, I would think, a huge mistake. On the 3rd of October, Governor General Hubertus van Mook arrives in the Netherlands East Indies. He was in exile in Australia. A full complement of troops don't arrive from the Netherlands until mid-46, but on the 29th of September, the SEAC troops finally arrive. It was originally supposed to be the US that did that. Next, please. Hans Meyer says, and we're going to the attack on Depok now. So this is happening after the troops arrived, just a few days after. Hans Meyer says that it was peaceful in Depok until the Japanese departed for Botenzorg, and the BKR was established, the Indonesian People's Army. It stayed that way until the 5th of October 45, when throngs of menacing nationalist youth poured into Depok and began shouting, "We are here to kill all Dutch, Mindonese and Javanese." I'm going to go through this quickly. There's a lot of violence for a week or more. There's killings. There's a martyrdom of Sudira. The women are made to watch this. The men are taken into prison, but it lasts for a week first. There's an onslaught for a week that goes on with them saying we were here to kill the Dutch, the Indonesian, the Ambonese and the Mindonese, and there are huge throngs of youth. Around 35, according to my documentation, around 35 to 35 are killed or maimed, and are rescued eventually. The men are not. They're put out to, they're sent to Botenzorg in a train. They're brutalized and sent to Botenzorg, but where they have to run the gauntlet through snipers and through people with machetes and angry crowd. A lot of them languish for a long time, for a week in jail there, and are finally also rescued by the Gurkhas. The rescue's been organized by a Dutch, he's a BBC reporter at that time, becomes a famous Dutch author. He's heard that there's a problem. He goes to the Gurkhas and said, well, I think we need to look at this, and they go into the town. Next, please. I'm just trying to see where my time is.
We're at 45 minutes, Nonja.
Am I?
It's 6:45, but you can take another 5 minutes.
Well, look, yeah, I do. Go past this. I wanted to come to the end to say what's happening now. So there's been an issue there was a Revolutie exhibition in the Rijksmuseum that I went to, and the guest curator from Indonesia, he said, well, look, the word Bersiat, which is what the Dutch used to talk about that period of violence, that word has colonial undertones or overtones, and it was used when they came in and with their spikes and belting, they would say Merdeka and Siap. Please, next. Look, these are personal accounts. These are personal accounts of the Depokkers, all telling what it was like at that time. And they watch the martyrdom. They watch someone being killed in front. They've all got to watch the martyrdom. His ears are cut off, his genitals are cut off. And so I won't go into that any further. It's hard to say who is a nationalist and who is a bandit, for instance. So that's what comes out of this. Please go further. These are the men talking about, just go past all the personal accounts because I don't have time now. The attack on Depok is right around the world in newspapers. Australia has a lot in Trove. at that time, of course, and all the personal accounts that I've collected from the Depokkers is in those newspapers. So it's like a triangulation. Please go on. This is the damage, some of the damage in Depok. Please move on. A lot of people then decide not to stay in Depok any longer. And the ones that go to the Netherlands are called Indonesians. The ones that stay there are Black Hollanders. Please go on. There's the ships, go on. These are the families that leave. Please go on. Some of them, these are some of the families that stay behind, thinking that they've got still their land, which is of course confiscated in 1952 from them. Please on. So best-selling author says history isn't a single story, but thousands of alternate stories. And if we choose one, we're silencing others. And Depok is, of course, a repository of contested histories about what happens. And because the protagonists hold different historical views about truth or myths about the Bersiat period. Please move on. As I've just told you about the Revolution exhibition, this is a problem. And of course, when he said this, the FIN, which is the Federation of Indo-Europeans, contested that. We'll go on. I won't talk about the big study at that time in the Netherlands, which is part of this whole story. 6,000 euros the Netherlands government put out to a study on decolonization, violence and war, and in comparison with the Bertelat, which is intra-ethnic violence, which is what it was. And they wanted to link it to a broader historiographical studies. And of course, all those results are out now to read. Please move on. That's my timer. So when it comes to the revolutionaries, and this I would like to say, Sultan Sojia, he says that this is happening. He has a pamphlet called Our Struggle. Our youth were unconsciously influenced by the Japanese. I won't read all that because obviously I don't have time. But he says that they're looting, and this is not the sort of thing that he wanted to see happening at all, not for their democratic struggle. He said it must be reactionary. What he describes is very much like a Stockholm syndrome, for which he's blaming the Japanese. Hugh and Gibson claim that fanatical zeal is frequently the moving force in history, and that it works better than people with more sanguine temperatures. Ben Wilson says that hotheads pull it down and don't reconstruct. But Jean-Paul Sartre has an interesting aspect of this, which I'll read quickly. True revolutionaries do not demand rights for themselves. They set out to destroy the idea of rights, which they understand as a hoax of the privileged class. To claim one's rights as an individual is not to be revolutionary, but to seek to join the privileged class. One cannot claim these rights for a whole class. This is because the rights derive from the oppression and are what the revolutionary wants to destroy. One cannot destroy oppression without destroying rights. Next slide. Look, my resources and my sources were Western. You can now read an Indonesian version of the Depok story in the book by Tree, and I won't try that. Her sources are Indonesian. This is published by the University of Amsterdam Press. It's free, open access, and in English. Next slide. That's my book. To read both, you would get a different perspective from the two perspectives I've been talking about. The next slide is the finishing slide. Thank you. Going forward, I would quote Einstein. He notes that we cannot solve problems with the same thinking that created them. In 2020, we were going to have a seminar in the University of Depok with papers from academics and journalists from both sides of that story. We hope this would enable a new perspective to develop. We were all in the middle of our research, and this was a perfect time to do it. Our exhibition from the Netherlands was going to go into the University of Indonesia at the same time. However, COVID had different ideas and stopped that process, which would have been a fabulous project. There is one, you may have heard of them, the Blue Diamonds, and their famous rendition of Ramona. So I'll leave it at that, and extensive about the personal testimonials about the attack on Depok. But they were all children at the time, and of course there's always the concept then of memory, but really the newspaper substantiated what to say. But I think I wanted to make the point that there's two different lots of sources being utilised to tell these stories, and it's time maybe to bring them together. Thank you.
Thank you, Nonja. That's fantastic. Really fascinating topic. We last year, unfortunately, missed the exhibition in Amsterdam by a matter of just a few weeks. So we got there. I think it must have finished in June or something, and we got there in July.
Yeah, I was there in March. I was still there after 5 years. I got caught there with COVID.
Oh. Oh dear. Well, if anyone has any questions, please either indicate by putting your hand up, using the chat function, or, as I said, making yourself known to me. That's really important. I had a couple of comments. I love the fact that you use an eclectic data set, which is exactly the sort of work that we're doing as well, which it's really important, I think, even as historians, that we take a kind of interdisciplinary approach and using everything from visual images, scientific discussions of plants, and of course, newspapers and the like is fantastic. The other thing that really struck me is just the kind of, just the really rank and pestilence-filled place that Batavia must have been. As you were talking about the sort of, horrendous conditions people were living in, it occurred to me, I think it's when Cook gets to Batavia in 1771 that he loses 30 men to malaria, and he's basically, he's lost a handful of people in the previous trip. He lost a third of his crew just while in Batavia. It really was disease-ridden, extraordinary.
About one of the properties of Depok. He goes to Weltervray, Chastelein's property.
Extraordinary. But it really must have been a pretty ghastly point at place to be at that time. I've got one question, and then I'm going to ask if anyone else has got any. I was wondering what existing today in terms of Depok heritage, whether or not, you've talked about the church, which is really interesting, but I was wondering, outside of the physical remains of the church or the presence of the church, what sort of things, and how is it marked in the popular memory?
In 52, when their lands were confiscated, they were left with the immediate acreage around their properties, and were given back the church, the school, and the community centre. They also were given a little bit of compensation, which enabled them to create the foundation of Cornelis Chastelein, because he's the big person they make. He's a slave owner, but no one seems to move in on that at all, which is extraordinary. So they constantly do things to try and keep alive the whole of the Depok story. But they're only a small part of Depok. Depok now is 200 kilometers square or something. Yeah. This is now only 6.2 part of that larger property. Mm-hmm. And certainly the doors that I showed you with the 12 family names in it in the church, they weren't put in there until after the diaspora, and people are sending money back. Yep. To do things like that. But the belief that there's actually 12, and the names, we've never found out when the actually names, apart from Sudir, were actually, we are assuming it's in the French time, around 1811 or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a constant, there's no one who's ever questioning Chastelein, or the fact that the whole thing has become exactly what he wanted, but not through him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you had one of the personal comments towards the end said Chastelein was the father of slavery, but he was anti-slavery.
Yes.
So there's obviously this incredible tension going on all the time.
Right. And this is in Depok. This is in Depok. He's saying no, he's the father of slaves. He's actually anti-slavery. And the one in the Netherlands said yes. But of course, there's he's telling me this story of 12 people. And of course, if you read the testament of 40 pages and the codicil, this is not the case. There's a load of slaves on that property with all those houses and all that and more planned. So it doesn't fit the story, but it doesn't seem to matter.
It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I can't see anyone putting their hand up, so please make yourself known if you... Yes, I can see someone putting their hand up. Hendrik, you're on mute, Hendrik. Unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thank you very much for a really interesting talk. I'm just wondering about the 12 families. Does that have any interaction with or relationship with the 12 tribes of Israel, you think?
I was wondering that.
Yes, I do. Right, I have got that there. There's an umbilical cord to either that or to the apostles, I would think.
Right. Okay. Yes.
What I write in my book. Yes.
And the other question, if I understand it correctly, is that apart from the Depokkers enslaved people, he in his testament he left a lot of enslaved people to his son. Is that correct? Who were not set free?
Yes, he never freed them all, and this is
right,
never considered by anything that I've read so far. He leaves enough enslaved to handle the properties for 6 years with another 6-year option, and he also gives, I said, young slaves to older slaves. The idea was to buy young slaves so that they wouldn't know where they came from. That was part of it. This is why the Depokkers don't really know who they are, and they're trying to construct an origins narrative.
So really a social experiment.
Because they become rich, and well, that's what seems to be the case. But of course, as I say, you would need the Indonesian perspective as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
To get a real handle on the violent period in Depok, to see what's happening.
Fascinating story. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a remarkable history. I mean, it's such a powerful image that you showed there of the Japanese kind of I guess, the Japanese occupied Southeast Asia. It happens so quickly. I mean, there are so many, it just falls so fast.
That's right.
It's quite a powerful image that you showed there, that map.
There's a lot from the oral histories that I would have liked to show.
Yeah.
But quite honestly, the newspapers around Australia and the newspapers in the Netherlands and around Europe, they verified what these people were telling me, what had happened at the time. Even though I'm thinking maybe memory's a problem, they're in their 70s and 80s now, but really it was triangulated through the newspapers from the period.
Yep. Yeah. Fantastic. Absolutely fascinating. Well, we're actually right up onto the hour. So if there aren't any questions, it just leaves it to me to thank you very much. It was really fascinating. And I'm constantly amazed and reminded of just the complexity of that is Indonesian history. And, it is really so multifaceted, and there's just so many threads. So just leaves it for me now to say that we've got 3 more seminars for this year. One next month with Dr. Mark van der Lok, who's going to be talking about Arakara oral traditions. And then in October, we don't have one in September because the team will be in Makassar and Jakarta doing some research and attending the Spice Roots Forum. In October, Professor Jane Leyden is going to be speaking about a very motley character, encounters at Port Essington. And the last one for the year will be Professor Annie Clark and Dr. Ursula Frederick, looking at inland seas, maritime imagery in the Central Plateau of Groot Island. So 3 really terrific papers coming up for the rest of the year. So thank you so much, Nonja. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And really did appreciate it very much. And I apologise for the few little technical hitches, but I'm glad we got it.
It was a shame I couldn't run my own. I could have skipped and moved around a lot more, but anyway, thank you.
No problems at all. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Nonja.
Thank you. Bye-bye. I'm just getting some thank yous. So
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.